Yes, I'm supposedly live now, and I always start with this sentence because I'm never truly sure if I'm live um, or not. Regardless, welcome back to Karim Talks About Economics. This is episode number 15 already, which is quite amazing actually, if you talk about it. And if you think about it, at least from my perspective, it's great that I've been consistent for this long. So Karim Talks About Economics is a podcast where okay, you see, hello and welcome back to a new episode of Karim Talks About Economics, and it's already episode 15. Quite happy for being able to give you consistent content for so long, 15 episodes. That is quite an achievement if you consider also the length of the different episodes. I think I've made so much content that you can actually not stream all of it in one single day, even if you watch it 24 hours, right? So the entire days. That's amazing. So Karim Talks About Economics is a podcast where I, Karim, talks about economics. Mostly I talk about a lot of things, but I try to relate it as much as economics. And the idea is that you get a kind of um, an insight into how I think about things and how, in general, we economists think about things. So I just recently graduated from Aarhus University with with a Master's of Science in Economics. This podcast is characterized with three things. Firstly, it's spontaneous, it's informative, and it's open-minded. It's spontaneous in the sense that it's less of a presentation, but rather a discussion. You can think of it as kind of a break from your day where you get and sit and talk to me, or at least listen to me for quite some time. However, you could also be yeah be directly with me uh, in the comment section, as this is also broadcasted live. And secondly, it's informative in the sense that I get, at least I'm thinking about myself here, I get more knowledgeable the more that I do these podcasts. Um, I get knowledgeable because I discuss things that I have not discussed uh, previously. Um, and you get more knowledgeable because you listen to things that you've not heard previously. Um, you we also get knowledgeable together because sometimes I do read from this book, The Wealth of Nation by Adam Smith, and I interpret this book and I make my thoughts out loud. So we both get more informed together. We also go through the news, and sometimes we also have some people with us here in the podcast, and we ask them about their worldview, and we get more informed from that. If you participate as an interviewee in this podcast, you also get more informed in the sense that I will be asking questions that you might not have thought of before. And in that sense, you will have to think differently to argue for your worldview differently. And it could also be that you open up your mind into new directions of thought, and that will help you in the future. Thirdly, it's open-minded in the sense that I'm not bound by a specific agenda. There is nothing that I'm not willing to discuss, and there's nothing that I feel that is out of reach. There's of course things that I wouldn't say because they are just wrong to say, um, and we have an example of that where I characterize maybe military service as slavery, but however I did def- definitely go back on that. However, that's a good thing that we said that and we made this mistake such that we could learn from it and become better, right? So we were open-minded about the idea. Well, what if someone suggested that the two are alike? How will we argue that they are not alike, right? So making mistakes is not the end of the world, or they could be, but hopefully they are not, at least not in this podcast where we just discuss things. Usually the agenda is such that we go through a couple of news, especially here in the corona crisis, in the pandemic, corona pandemic. We go through the numbers, we see how countries are doing, then we go into mainly some news agencies that I follow, and then we have a follow up from last time. Sometimes we have a specific question, or for the most part, we have a specific question. However, today it's slightly different because we had a lengthy interview yesterday with Hamid Reza. If you've not watched that, go back to podcast number 14 and watch that. But I will be summarizing it today. So usually I summarize it after the interview. However, the interview went a little bit over time. That is, of course, good. Now we also have an additional content for today. After which we have either a reading session where I read from a book. Currently, we're reading in The Wealth of Nation. I'm planning on reading in Capital by Piketty afterwards. Um, and sometimes we have someone to interview, right? Then we have a summary of all of the things that we've discussed, a section that I call New Thoughts, and we come up with a question for next time. Now, yesterday I did not come up with a new question because the follow-up is going to be the summary of the interview. And lastly, we have a Q&A, and that is mostly reserved for you guys to ask questions into what I've discussed and maybe things that I have not discussed, some things that I've missed to discuss and that you would like to pick my brain on, right? And also along as we go along, you can also ask me questions as we go live. However, as I can see, there's not a lot of people that are following these podcasts live. So in the future, hopefully, that will become more of an active part. So usually when we and yeah, let's go to the news section. And how I do that is that I share my screen, and then I have screenshotted um, some things, not more than 20 minutes ago, and then we consider them together. So firstly, as per usual, the number of COVID cases. So all the cases that have been detected in the world are very close to 13 million, 12,968,000. That means that in 3 days we've already hit nearly 1 million, right? We started at 11 and then now we're nearly up at 13. The death rate is not has not significantly changed from yesterday. It's 569,000. It is a lot of people. And there's 7,500,000 around that number that have recovered from the disease or from the virus. And we've also started to consider what is with the active cases and the closed cases. For the active cases, we see that only 1% are seriously critical, and that is a percentage that has not changed, meaning that the virus may not have changed in its severity. And with closed cases, we have 7% that are dead. While in numerical terms that is a large number, in percentage terms it is also a large number, but it has not changed in the past weeks. So 7% is consistent, and the 1% so also, which is a good thing for now. We hope, of course, that it will be better. Then next we consider the number or the different countries, right? And the new cases that they have. You can also on the screen see other dimensions for measuring the severity of the disease in these different countries. And we have the top 20 on the screen right now. The US is still at number one. Yesterday they had 61,000 new cases, near to 62. However, that is an improvement, as previously it was 71. So, as we also saw that they had some days that were lower, right? They were down in the 40s, and we questioned that a little bit because they were up at the 60s. Then they were up at the 70s, so that's maybe also an outlier, right? So outliers are not only always good; they can also be bad. The new deaths in the US is at 731. The total deaths in the US have hit 137,402 individuals. It's a lot of people. It's definitely a lot of people. It's bigger than a war, right? In some wars, not that many people die. Brazil is still number two, nearly 2 million total cases, 36,000 new cases, and also an improvement. Maybe that's an outlier. Maybe it's because of the weekend, as we suggested yesterday. Um, However, I don't know. We see that the death rate has also decreased, at least compared to yesterday and many of the days prior to that. It's now at 968. Again, maybe it's because it's the weekend. India has a small increase, 27. No, I think actually it's a decrease. It had 28, didn't it, yesterday? But 27,755, and that's 543. However, if you consider the total deaths, India is not the third at all, right? You have the UK at third with 44,000. However, the new cases in the UK is lower. It's at 820 only. Actually, one of the best in the top 10, or the best in the top 10 countries. South Africa has 13,000 new cases. So the weekend has not mattered for them. Or maybe it has, and the true number is at 15 or something like that. So South Africa is a country that we followed closely. Why? Because even though they are not in the top, well, they are the top 10 now, but prior to that, they were, at, yeah, well, they were at a very low level, and then suddenly they started to have these 5-digit number of new cases, which for me, right, I see that as, while it is of course a bad sign, it is a good sign in that they actually have the capability to test that many people, right? You'd because South Africa is an African country, and it's the only African country that is significantly hit. It's not significantly hit because I know that Egypt is also significantly hit, but it's the only country that can actually give you numbers that seem somehow realistic for a country with a bad health, where people would suggestively not follow the guidelines, right? And they have apparently tested 2,108,000 people, which is not a bad thing because that's more than Mexico. It's more than Chile, and it's more than Peru, and it's nearly as much as Brazil. Even though Brazil nearly has 9 times as many cases, right? Mexico is also a country that we've significantly looked at because it's the third of well, it's ranking the third in the deaths, right? The new deaths, so 665. Even though, yeah, they're not up there, right, with the new cases, they're at 6,000, the same as Russia. Russia is of course a country that we question a lot because They have a lot of cases, however, little deaths. But so is the case with India, right? But India is now accumulating the deaths, um, and I'm a little bit worried about India and the true numbers of India because there's a billion people over there. Now, of course, you can say, well, why aren't you worried about China? Well, that's because we know that China is kind of faking the numbers, and I say that while I'm very worried that I might be wrong, but I think I'm right because it's the system is different over there. I don't think that they feel the need to share their data with other countries. I don't feel that they want to share their data with other countries. It's like saying that the USSR also wanted to share their data with other countries, right? And that, of course, didn't happen with the Chernobyl crisis. So why would China do it with the Corona crisis? Really good question. Um, Now, other countries that I might be worried about is Iran. As we talked to Hamid Reza yesterday, he said that the official number, yeah, is around 12,000. The deaths here, I'm talking about the deaths, around 12,000. However, he says that maybe the true number is more closer to 60. I'm not gonna speculate about that. However, he might he might have a point. He knows the country more than I do, uh, and Iran might also want to to lower the true estimates. And we also saw in the news um, couple of a couple of days ago that Iran could not handle a lockdown any further, economically at least, because they already have all the sanctions. I think that was in the BBC, if I'm not too mistaken. Just checking how many minutes have gone by, not to make this too lengthy. Okay, and yeah, the ranking I think is still the same. However, in the top, things have might have changed a little bit with South Africa. Um, Spain and France have not given any new data. Maybe they are overwhelmed. I don't know. Maybe they don't test on Saturdays. Also don't know. However, the ranking at the bottom is still kind of the same. Canada is still number 20. However, Canada is actually doing surprisingly well. Only 14 deaths and 221 new cases. No, now something that you can see on the screen, but that's the bottom, right? Because these are all above 100,000. But what about those that are lower? Something that I've noticed is some countries have have started to have in the to be in the thousands again, right? You'd think that countries at the bottom are now doing better, but really not. And a country that I looked at with kind of a questioning eye is Israel. And I went into the data, and it seems like they had a good period because I knew they had a good period, and then or they had a period where it started because one of my friends had to travel there, but then his flight got canceled, right? But then it got well again. But now you see that the numbers are up at the thousands again. So so at least in the data, it seems like this is already the second wave that they remove some constraints for social interactions, but then they uplifted them, and then it happened again. Or it could also be that now they are testing Palestinians, including Palestinians in the data where they did not do that previously. I really don't know. So that's an interesting country. However, there's also many other countries down there that are in the thousands that I should be considering. Um, but uh, but 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 yeah, because this is not a podcast only about COVID-19. We only look at the top 20 and consider how they are doing. For the future, how do I suppose that these countries will be doing? Mm, I hope they will be doing better. Um, are they opening up or closing down? It doesn't seem that any country is closing down again. Um, as you will see in other news, and I'm just going to bring that up now. Um, is it here? Yes, as you can see here, the UK might be doing it, right? So they have now opened up. Um, However, as you can see in the picture, and as have been criticized a lot, um, people are not social distancing. People are not wearing masks. However, as I just told you, and as you can see here in the headline, the UK is the country with the third most deaths. So it has been hit very hard. The question is, well, now you've opened up the country. What's going to be the consequences, right? And will you really be willing to close it down again? Because we see that the United States closed down, or it was bad, closed down, went a little bit better, then it opened up, then things got out of hand. But they have not closed down, and it seems like they will not be closing down, right? However, the UK, the same case, right? And as we discussed a couple of days ago, it seems politically might be moving more towards the American approach rather than the European approach. Um, However, let's also see what will happen to Europe, as a lot of countries in Europe has also opened up. So Denmark has been open for 2 months now, and the cases have not increased. However, it's only recently that we've opened up to other European countries. So will that impact? Will that have any impact? I don't know. Let's see. So in other news, as you can see here, the main headline is that Trump backs down on the mask. So that means that he is now wearing a mask. Of course, you have the CNN perspective on it. And this is this is actually a headline that you will also be seeing in other news. It's a little bit weird that it's a big thing, but that just tells you how important the next election is, right, in November. But that's, I suppose, how it always is. The elections are quite important in the U.S., right? Who's sitting in office to make and the mask is maybe symbolic, right? It's symbolic for things. Um, yeah, and of course they gotta have this tricky headline saying that he backed down, right? He's not a strong leader or something like that, because that's the CNN perspective of things. That's how the editors want to frame it. Yes. Third news that is important here is Bollywood. That's India. So a lot of people in India have the COVID-19 have caught the coronavirus. As you can see here in BBC, it's the exact same news. However, here they give you a concrete example, right? That three generation of Bollywood actors have the COVID-19 virus, or have tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. Is that significant? Well, it's significant in the sense that it's not only, well, you'd think that it's the poor that would get like would get the virus in the UK, in India, because they live so close to one another. However, here it puts it in perspective that it's actually the entire population that can get infected. I actually don't have any Indian friends, which is quite weird. But I've also not met any Indian people, and well, that's a lie. I've not met any Indian people at the university, or at least people that are studying economics with me. here at Aarhus University. It might be in Copenhagen. So I cannot give you, and yeah, the goal is that I want to say I cannot give you the insight into how how the Indians view this, for right. I cannot give you an insight into how they think about it. However, what I think is it's it's worse than they wanted, and the COVID-19 is taking over, and they don't have enough test kits, um, and maybe also that they are more concerned about um, the conflict that they have with China currently. Uh, a headline earlier this morning was that they sent some diplomats to Taiwan. So they are using the same strategy as China in the sense that they are also trying to surround China as China is trying to surround India from all borders. Um, so maybe that's also having its impact and having its weight in the new on the news in India and for the Indian population. I don't know how much they care about China, right? Because population is known to be less wealthy and maybe less concerned with foreign affairs. However, it will be taking the toll on the time that the leaders, the political leaders, can spend on COVID-19 internally in the country. So, in other news, we see here, well, you have the Iran human error for shooting down the plane. I'm not going to go into Iran because that's the summer, that's the follow up from last time. And then you have the Sudan. And a third thing is that you have Sudan making some changes in their Islamic laws. So they are doing some reforms after 30 years. Now, what is significant to know here is that Sudan had a very strict Sharia law, uh, such as the one in Saudi Arabia, where, for instance, women and children could not travel with outside the country without the consent of a male subordinate, um, right? So they had to have a written consent from one of the males in the family before the women could travel. Also, female mutilation was a big thing. Female genital mutilation was a big thing in Sudan, and and also not drinking alcohol was a big thing. So they did not sell alcohol. So of course, selling alcohol has its impact on the tourism that can enter into the country. Um, and the idea is then that they are abolishing some of these laws. The question is, are these laws really enforced by law, or is it enforced by the people living, uh, the Sudanese population itself, right? Um, will there be a time where, or is it such that it is by law that the woman has to ask the man for permission, or is it just the culture that has it such? And the female mutilation, or genital mutilation, is that uh, a cultural thing, an Islamic thing, right? However, they have abolished it, so maybe it will now be done illegally. It will be done illegally. However, now it's a crime. So that's a good thing. So at least some people will not be doing it. And yeah, also the Islamic thing, right? So the Islamic law. The question is this a symbol? Is this a simple symbolic move? In writing, first of all, in writing this article, right? Because of the um, the things that have been going on with the Sophia Hagara or Hagara Sophia, right? As you all can also see here, right? It's right above it. The Pope paid by Hagia Sophia, a mosque decision, right? So that's already there. So there's some religious perspective in writing this title. And secondly, these reforms have also been wanted for a very long time because Sudan is, I think, more of an African country than an Arabic country, right? That should be moved by Islamic law. You have Egypt above it that has, well, in Egypt you can drink alcohol. It is sold. Secondly, genital mutilation is not allowed, and this of a woman needing a male improvement is also not there, right? So maybe this is a modernization of Sudan. Let's see. Let's see if that is the case or not. And lastly, again, COVID-19 is taking over, right? So Florida sets a US record with 15,000 new cases. Not a good thing. Not a good thing. Lastly, of course, Bloomberg. It's about the tech world. There's really nothing to say here. Let's wait until the markets open up tomorrow. The gold has nearly, now that we're here, right? The gold has nearly um, hit uh, $1,800, and the barrel of oil has hit crude oil. The WTI has hit $41, which is quite an improvement because this year it went into negative territory, negative $32. So that's of course a good thing. But the idea is that it's now reaching kind of the pre-corona period, right, where it was at 50, stable at 50, and that relates to a news that, and I'm saying that because countries are now allowed to produce as much oil as they need, as economies are now demanding more oil. Yeah, so that's the idea. I think that's it for the news section, and then back to me. We'll now go to the follow up from last time with the interview. I'm just gonna go chronologically into what we discussed. After which, yeah, let's see if there's time for reading today. Um, if not, we'll be asking a question for next time. So Hamid Reza, as he said, he was an assistant professor. He'd made research into 10 different topics, or no, he taught 10 different subjects, and those are his interests. They include innovation, strategic management, and others. He worked on 30 different projects, and that he has, as he later tells us, he's done that with his private research company. I don't know how that works, but I think it's kind of that, um, you're finding areas that can be researched in, and then you're creating a team, right, from university professors that can work together. And it doesn't matter what kind of university they come from or where they come from. Um, so, for instance, the thing that I worked on for the EU project that was owned by a group of research managers, right, in Norway, their entire job is just to get funding to do research, and then we were part of that group that they found to do this research with. or this project with, right? You also had other people in the UK, some in the Netherlands, some in Belgium, uh, and in Sweden, and other people also in Denmark, and people in Norway. And then I saw maybe that is what Hamid Reza was doing, right? Finding the funds and then assigning or working in his network to find people that can help him do these researches. He's done 16 scientific articles, as he said, and 10 books. Um, and that is both in English and in Farsi, so in two different languages, right? Um, I also know that he's working uh, now at Aarhus University on other research papers, but they have not been published yet. Let's see how that will be going. And then we started, yeah. So he introduced himself, and then we went into. I wanted, yeah, he went a little bit too fast, I think, at the beginning. I just wanted to take it from an objective point of view. However, we went into his profession, and then we started to look at it from an objective point of view. And I asked him, well, what's the difference between the research process in Denmark and in Iran? And he said that in Iran it's more quantitative, and in Denmark it's more qualitative. Now, I would beg to differ, but but maybe it has something to do with what he worked on. Um, right? So, but yeah, yeah. The talk continued, and he said that in Iran the PhD thesis would be 400 pages, and it would take 5 years. Where in Denmark it's more between 100 and 200, and 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 it takes 3 years, right? And then I asked him, well, what's the quality then? And then he said the quality here in Denmark is maybe a little bit better. And why was that? Well, that is mostly because in Iran they don't have access to a lot of resources or sources of information, right? And that is because of the limitations that they have due to the geopolitical conflicts that they already have with the United States, for instance, right? So you could imagine that because the US is a little bit afraid they will get a little bit knowledge into some specific area, they would limit the access of Iranian researchers into this specific journal. Now, I don't know how that relates to management, right? But maybe it also goes down into that, right? So if a journal or a specific organization owns multiple journals, it might be easier for them just might be easier for this big group that has a lot of journals just to cut its ties with Iran. However, it can also be the opposite, right? That Iran is not allowing the researchers to get this information. And that's also what we discussed later. He also said that there might be limitation on the internet. And as I talked to also another one in my network that is Chinese, this individual, I'm not going to say if it's a male or female, as to keep the identity of this individual hidden, that in China, sometimes at the university, in some universities, there's only access to internet in one specific building. It's a little bit creepy, in my opinion, such that they can actually control what you're looking at and also limit the access to the internet and maybe grant access to some individuals and not to other individuals. As we also discussed with the Hamid yesterday, which might also be the case in Iran. So the idea is that it goes both ways. So geopolitical conflicts with other nations might limit the willingness of the other nations to help the people in that nation, so in Iran in this case, and the such that the country does not want to tell its people the entirety of the situation, thus limiting the access of the individuals to internet, for instance. Now he said the start of his stardom happened in 2005, where he worked on a model for business excellence to measure the excellence of the service industry in Iran, and he had some models to do that, and um, the goal was to create a national quality award, and it has something. It also related to organization pathology, and he was called in by the president, and actually he did show me a picture where he was with the president of Iran at that time, Ahmed Najad's uh, Ahmed Nagid, not sure of the names. Sorry. Um, However, there are some proofs. I will not be sharing them here, as they might be sensitive. I don't know, but yeah, he told us that in 2005 he had a good relationship with the government, and he was allowed to pursue his goal of creating this national quality award. However, 6 months later, they thought, huh, let's change the project such that it is for the Islamic world, right, with Islamic mindset. And he was not satisfied with that, and therefore he was kicked off of the project. And yeah, he had a lot of problem with not enough access into comprehensive models that characterized Islam, because it's of course a little bit difficult, and not a lot of um, sources to be able to go through, because there were also some limitation from the other countries. However, in that period, he did say that he had traveled to other countries, such as the UK, which is a little bit mind-boggling, right? Because a country that's closed, why would they send some researchers outside? Well, it might only be because they trusted him to some sort. They granted him this access, and maybe they had someone with him to make sure that they looked after him and they knew exactly what he was doing and not doing. Um, there's a lot about we talked a lot about or he talked a lot about how Iran is not granting the access of people, um, and interesting, and hiding information to some extent. An interesting thing that he also said was, well, they might grant us access for things, but then we wouldn't be allowed to use it to its full extent. And here he gave an example of a constraint theory process, to consider the innovation of firms that was developed. If I remember the name correctly, it's Eliyahu Gotrat. Gotrat, and he was allowed to use the model for education. However, he was not allowed to say who had created this. So it's a little bit it's a little bit difficult to know how exactly how that would go about. But but yeah, I don't know if the internet is good now. It seems like it's not. I really don't know what's happening. I think it's back. Okay, we had a period where it fully went black. Yeah, I should really fix this. I really don't know how. But yeah, I think it's back now. I think it's back now. I don't have any programs running in the background, so I really don't know why it it would do this. Um, but okay, so yeah, he was allowed to tell about it, to tell about these theories, but he was not allowed to tell us, to tell his pupils who had created it, which is a little bit symbolic, right? We're trying to teach our students, but we're not fully informing them about the sources. So the question is to keep a blind, do these students then have a blind eye, or will they now be incentivized to research things on their own? Well, I don't know. And can he tell him, hey, this is a secret? I don't know how these things how these things work. Then he went on to say that there are two types of people in Iran: those who follow and those who just say no to the government. And those who follow will have a good life; they will have it easy. Makes sense. Um, and those who says no, they will have it a little bit difficult. Those who say yes will also have a lot of money and things like that. Um, I think it's maybe good if I. It's really a lot here. We talked a lot about a lot of things. But yeah, this program that he had to make, the National Quality Award, was the start of his problems, right? And then I tried to bring it back to research, and he said that there's not a lot of freedom in doing research, right? So as we talked previously with Dr. Basim, um, in Saudi Arabia and Europe, it's maybe more of a game to find something that can provide funding for you, because if it doesn't provide funding, it doesn't. There's no value in pursuing it if you're going towards the money, right? If you're a middle class individual. Um, in Iran, however, it's such that you can survive or not depending on the research that you do. So you have to get the consent from the government that this is okay to research it. However, the universities, yeah, for you listeners, it might seem a little bit weird that we're talking about these things back and forth, but that's how the discussion went. And it tells you also how spontaneous this podcast is. So we talked about that universities in Iran can be for free, those at least that are governmental. Um, it's also those with the better quality, which is a little bit weird, right? Because those universities are supposedly also those that are controlled by the government, as they are governmental, therefore are should be more strict in a country where strictness really means strictness, right? But they are with better quality, as he said. As a student, you also don't receive any money. Then he went back to discuss about his private entity, where he said that he had to pay he or yeah he had to pay 5 to 10% taxes, right? And that he had worked on 30 projects. How, and when he came to Denmark, he tried to do the same. However, he did have some issues with taxes. He had to pay a lot more in taxes, and he might not have known that at the beginning. He said that the tax system in Denmark is good because you, as a citizen, you know where the money is being used. However, in Iran, it's a little bit difficult to know where the money is being used, especially also since the government has a lot of revenue from other sources, from natural resources. He says that a lot of people in Iran are poor, 70% in his estimate. He says that there is a military police in Iran that is quite prevalent. He says that they might be researching into nuclear weapons. They might also be giving money to Hezbollah. That's maybe where the money is going to geopolitical fighting. Things that might not be in the best interest of people. Um, as he said before the COVID-19, there was some demonstrations, and those would probably return back after the COVID. So that will be interesting to see if he's right in that or he's not. However, he said that it wouldn't be sustainable to run the country in this fashion. Then we talked about, well, what had created Iran to the country that it is today, and there's a lot of reasons. And for me, it was interesting to get the insight of what had happened, what was his experience of the Iran-Iraq war. And he said that he was only 10 years old when that happened. Um, and he lived in near to Tehran, where the Iraqi actually bombed, right? And he heard those bombs. And he said that it was very stressful and that they had a safe house, as a place where they would hide when they heard that bombs or that planes were flying over Tehran and that they might be bombed. And he says that he lost some of his very good friends, five of those. And the war lasted 8 years when he was 10 to 18. And he remember multiple times where he couldn't go to school. It also seems that he still has contact to some people. Mm, yeah, well, it seems like he still have contact to some people in Iran because he keeps referring to some friends that he has that have told him things. Um, so either it's conspiracy theories or things are actually happening that we are not hearing about in the news. He said that, and then he returned back to the Iraqi war, and he said that there was 4 good years after the war that was very good for the economy. That it makes sense, rebuilding and job to all. But after which a dictatorship came, and he said that what happened to Qasem Soleimani a couple of months ago, that the US is quite happy about, might have been an inside job because um, he had learned too much information, and there was already um, Iranian people that wanted him uh, out of the picture. We then returned back to him coming to Denmark, and he told us about at least a failure at the beginning, that he had applied to a lot of jobs but never gotten any. And the reason for that, he says, was because he was unlucky, and well, to put it frankly, he actually said that it was pure discrimination, and that people would prefer Western people to Eastern people. And he said that he'd actually talked to someone, and they had told him that directly, face to face, or over the phone, or something like that, right? That the name is a problem, at least. Then he started this private company. However, it went bad with the taxes. Therefore, he continued his education at Aalborg University in innovation and management. He thinks that Denmark um, is a free country where you have time, where you can devote yourself to what you like, or at least that was his experience, since he had a couple of years years off. He learned new things about himself, and he 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 started to write in more in English, and he acknowledged he got better at it, and he says that he even sent a book to publication in Germany. And I asked him, just for curiosity, well, what is it that kept you going? Other people that come here might, well, at least from your situation, right, that he had this problem in 2005, and then things started to spiral. He kept saying no to the government, and he had to flee the country. Some people might have given up, right? But he said that he wanted to be a role model for his children, um, that were respectively 18 and 7 years old. Uh, he wanted to do it for them. So those are the things that keep him going every day, and things that make him want to be a better man. So what else does he do here in Denmark? Well, he says that he does a lot of political interviews, where he wants to shed light on the Iranian people, and the freedom that they deserve, and the actual picture of how they are. And I think he also saw this as an opportunity to voice his opinion, because after which he went into a discussion into the special police that is called SEPA, and he said that those actually control the government, and they control everything. They can limit your career path. It's kind of a big brother, or at least that's the picture that I got. It's kind of a big brother that is over you, that knows exactly what you're doing and what you're not doing. Um, and he said that one of his classmates became his boss, not because of his quality in work, but because he was a part of this SEPA, and yeah, he gave us an example of what it would mean to be a part of SEPA. It would mean that you had to say yes to whatever they were telling you, firstly, right? So it's a group of people, or a party, right? Here in the West, we can look at it as a party, right? Because that's also what happens in political parties. If you're not willing to do whatever they are doing, or kind of follow their lead, they will not want to associate with you sometimes. However, it's more strict over there, of course, and also a little bit more symbolic, in the sense that you had to grow a beard, and you had to pray in a mosque. You couldn't just pray in your office. You had to actually pray in a mosque. He gave us an example where he had an interview in 2008, where he had to talk about the economical situation in Iran, and he was asked by some special forces that were viewing this interview, that he had to kind of tell that Iran was doing well. However, he told the truth, and he had to be interrogated by these special forces, and that was as that happened after 2005. That was also the beginning, the kind of the mid of the spiral, right? So they left it be, I suppose, because he continued living there for some time, and he, he then went a little bit mm, he went a little bit formal and or personal and said that in a lot of Iranian people have kind of two lives. Um, they have the one that they have at home where they do what they want. They can drink, they cannot pray, they can do whatever kind of live their life, right? However, when they went outside, they had to adhere to some, well, we'd here call social norms. I suppose there it would be laws, right? Um, yeah. Um, I remember one time when I was in Saudi Arabia. Um, that was when I was 11 years old or something. We wanted to take a taxi, and it was prayer time, and the taxi just, well, firstly there was nearly no taxis on the road, but the one taxi that was there took us quickly, and then when because there are two calls for prayer in Islam, when the second call of prayer, he told us just to get out, right? Because he had to pray. Because if the police saw him in prayer times and he wasn't praying, then they would just beat him up or take him for interrogation, right? So maybe that's also what's happening in Iran to a lesser extent, and also Saudi Arabia. I don't think it's like that now, but regardless, he said that this symbolic view of Islam in Iran is only a symbol, and it's not by it's not in action. Um, he also said that there is a selection team that, of course, are part of this SEPA, and let me do like this. Yeah, that's much better. And this selection team would kind of tell you how your life would be, right? You could bribe these people, of course, makes sense, but you also needed to create a good relationship with them. Um, yeah, we an example of that would, for instance, be women. Uh, Women had to be wearing their scarf, and if they're wearing a good scarf, because there's good scarf and bad scarves, good scarf I suppose covers your entire hair, and bad scarf covers up to here, and the idea is that you had to cover your entire hair, and in that way you would be selected by this selection team to get employment afterwards. He also told us a personal example where one of his students, um, female students, was a little bit sad because she had a feeling that she was not going to be selected by this selection team, and the opportunity to get a job afterwards would be slim or non-existent, and she would then have to go the other route and become and get married, right, in order to support her family. So that gives you an insight into the power of this selection team and this special police, this SEPA. He also told you that beside having a beard and going to the mosque and praying, you also needed some special knowledge into Islamic history. So they could ask you that in special interviews and things like that for public appointment. And that is maybe also prioritized above special knowledge into specific fields, as he gives an example of an HR representative in a public organization that said, I was only doing my duties to be an HR representative here, And it has to be noticed that this individual went to some Islamic university, and it was only Islamic knowledge that he had. And by Islamic knowledge, I mean the history of Islam and the laws by Islam, you, and therefore he became the HR representative, right? You had a problem at work, you put him. How should people work together? You asked him, because it would definitely be in an Islamic way. The question then became: is this sustainable in the long run? And objectively, no. But what did he say? Well, he said that the the, um, the government is going to do whatever it can to stay in power. Currently, it has some problems with the United States and the rest of the Western nations, so Europe. However, it has strengthened its relationship to China and Russia, and it's selling oil to China. It's cooperating with the military and selling land to China, and it nearly only has these two countries as friends. However, those two countries are quite powerful, as they also have a veto right in the United Nations Security Council. As we saw yesterday, they can veto things of large proportions. So that's also interesting. So they have some people that can back them. Now the question is, what's the motivation for these people to back Iran? Well, geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East, such that the US doesn't come too close, maybe. Could also be the oil that exists in Iran, right? But Russia has some oil, but it's of course cheaper for them to get it from Iran. China doesn't have a lot of oil, as we hear, and Iran also is close to some countries that China might have some conflicts with, right? India comes to mind. He says that before the COVID-19, they had this huge demonstration, as we remember. However, the government killed 1,500 people in 3 days, which is quite a large number. And he believes that these demonstrations will return back to the streets once the COVID-19 is kind of over, such that it's more realistic that people are on the streets, right, without getting the virus, because of course people are afraid of that. However, he says that as 70% of the population are poor, it's questionable how much they are willing to suffer much more under this regime. um, and also unemployment is high, and also the Gini coefficient, so the difference between the rich and the poor in Iran is quite high. So the question is, well, how long will this last? And I think that that's the most important things that we discussed with him. Well, one last thing was, well, hmm, well, at least for me, that was interesting. It makes sense that if it's difficult to get a job in the public sector because it's this SIPA that picks everything, and there is a large unemployment, and the universities are for free, such that people can actually get an education. Why is it that people don't start a private company? And here he gave me the insight that yes, it is going to be private, but it's going to be private in the sense that it's not run strictly by the government, and part of the revenue goes to you, not the government. However, they will keep a very close eye into what you're doing, and you need so many permits that you will have to do so many favors to people and hire so many of your network's people, such that they might not even be qualified, right? They might have this Islamic education rather than an actual education into HR, for instance, that it might not be profitable for you to run these private companies anymore. However, then the question becomes, well, for me at least, that I did not get an answer to, well, it doesn't need to be a multinational company, right? It can be a very small company, 2 to 3 employees, and there you can really not ask for favors, right? It's a little bit difficult because it won't even be profitable and it wouldn't make sense that you'd get a call. Now, is there any constraints for these? Well, most likely. Um, yeah, the main idea is, and the main thing that I got out of this, I think it's the notion of what happens to a country when the private industry and the market powers, the invisible hand of the market, is not allowed to work its magic, let's say, in the labor market. When people are not allowed to match with one another freely, but there is this religious constraint, this political constraint, this technological constraint, internet and the such. What then happens? Well, what happens is huge unemployment, huge difference between rich and poor, and differences that exist between people that are not correlated with their um, human capital, not their quality, not their marginal product, right? So you might have a very clever and productive individual that doesn't get a job because he does not follow the guidelines. Is that worthwhile? Well, not if the country is not well off. But of course, when you have this influx of free money that comes from oil, it's of course not free because there's some maintenance cost that goes into it. Uh, it's of course going to be cheap, be worthwhile, at least in the short run, to run this kind of strategy. Now the question is about the people. You have 80 million people, and that's of course a problem when you're. I suppose it's also a strength in the sense that it's difficult for all of them to come together. However, if they come together, there is a huge risk. And the question is also, what about an inside coup? As you saw with this Qasim Soleimani that was killed, was that an inside job or was it not? You saw some people going out on the streets being sad for him for a couple of days, but then after very few days, it turned against the government, right? Because young individuals suddenly saw, well, you're going on the streets for this thing, cool. So we can go on the streets. And then they really went and talked about what was important to them. But as Hamid said, well, the result was 1,500 dead. Um, it's worth noting that I went while talking to Hamid into Google and checked the Gini coefficient, or at least the estimated Gini coefficient of Iran, and it's around 40. It's worth noting that that's up there with the UK and the United States. And that tells you that wealth is not properly distributed, especially not if you also consider that this is an Islamic country where people are supposed to help with one another. Uh, so I don't think this is sustainable. I think it was interesting to get an insight into what it actually is to live in these things under such a regime, and it's worth actually knowing what kind of rules these regimes can actually do and what kind of systems they can build up and create um, to sustain power. Now, the reason for sustaining power was not really uh, it's not that it wasn't considered, but it wasn't really. I didn't really ask about that. However, one can only uh, imagine that that is because they can uh, they can get a lot of wealth out of it, right? A lot of supposed security out of it. And I can see that we're now more than an hour and 15 minutes into this. And the question is it worthwhile to read a little bit? And I definitely think it is, because this was too long, and I'm sorry. I should maybe have structured it a little bit. I think I'm going to put a little bit more into the quality of this podcast. However, that would mean that you would have less of this podcast. But let's see. So I'm thinking I think it's only gonna be 2 pages or something like that, because I'm gonna try to close it at an hour and a half, 2 hours. We're still reading in The Wealth of Nation by Adam Smith, which is a book written in 1776, or at least published in that year, that discusses, it's basically philosophical and economically about how countries become rich. And we talk, and the last thing that we were talking about can be summarized by this quote, which I quite love, I think is quite fascinating. And listen carefully. If the prodigality of some were not compensated by the frugality of others, the conduct of every prodigal, by feeding the idle with the bread of the industrious, would tend not only to beggar himself, but to impoverish his country. So that meant that you had some people that would overspend and some people that would be a little bit scarce with their spending and save as to invest into other productive laborers. Now, you could give this money to people that were lazy, the unproductive, or at least, or at the very end, people that are totally outside the labor market. Um, and if you have more of these people than people that are actually saving their money, you would have a failed state. You would have a state that become even more poor. And I suppose that's actually what's relating that to Iran. Maybe that is what's happening to Iran. You have these unproductive people, those people that are not educated and don't have, um, well, they got into their position because of some other thing than their productivity, and they're giving money to other people that are non-productive. Therefore, the country is getting poorer instead of investing that into people that are actually productive. And then he goes on and says that luckily for us, we have more of these productive people than the unproductive, and that's why the country is moving forward and becoming richer and richer and richer. So he ended it. So last time, just 2 days ago, we ended on a positive note. Let's see where we are at now. And this is page 182. So great nations are never impoverished by private, though they sometimes are by public prodigality and misconduct. Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah, I think I'm gonna interview less people. Nah, it's good with interviewing people, but I should read a little bit more. Because listen to this. The first sentence we read is fascinating. The first sentence, I tell you. It's the very first sentence that is going to be a bullet point. And yeah, usually when I read, I have some, I have a book beside me, a notebook where I write the most important things to make a sum up. And yeah, so great nations. Usually they are only words, but sometimes they are also sentences, as this one. So it's interesting that he says that great nations can never be impoverished by the private, right? Firstly, it's interesting that he says that great nations, so it's already nations that are well established, right? So does that mean that poor nations can be impoverished by the private? Well, maybe if they are being exploited, and that too we see happening in Africa, right? So one has to really dig deep into what he's saying. Now, he also says that sometimes the public makes the country worse. Prodigality, right? That they are overspending and giving money to the poor. Now, that's what happened in Denmark at some point in the 80s, where the welfare state was kind of failing. And that was because the government gave a lot of unemployment insurance to people that were not working, and it did not require a lot of them. Now that changed with time as they started to require more of these people, right? So you could only have this if you actually applied for jobs. Yes. So this is basically he's talking about liberalism, yeah, political economic liberalism or capitalism, right? He's talking about capitalism. So the whole or almost the whole public revenue is in most countries employed in maintenance unproductive hands. So he goes into further detail why it is the public that can create this impoverishment, right? Make the country poorer. But let's carry on. Such are the people who compose a numerous and splendid court, a great hmm, ecclesiastic, hmm, ecclesiastical establishment, great fleets and armies, who in times of peace produce nothing, and in times of war acquire nothing which can compensate the expense of maintaining them, even while the war lasts. Such people, as they themselves produce nothing, are all maintained by the produce of other men's labor. When multiplied, therefore, to an unnecessary number, they may, in a particular year, consume so great a share of this product as not to leave a sufficiency for maintaining the productive laborers who should reproduce it next year. The next year's produce, therefore, will be less than that of the foregoing, and if the same disorder should continue, that of the third year will be less than that of the second year. Those unproductive hands, who should be maintained by a part only of the spare revenue of the people, may consume so great a share of their whole revenue and thereby oblige so great a number to encroach upon their capitals, upon the funds destined for the maintenance of the productive labor, that all the frugality and good conduct of individuals may not be able to compensate the waste and degradation of produce occasioned by the violent and forced encroachment. This frugality and good conduct, however, is upon most occasions, it experience sufficient to compensate not only the private prodigality and misconduct of individuals, but the public extravagance of government. The uniform, constant, and or the uniform, constant, and uninterrupted effort of every man to better his condition, the principle from which public and national as well as private opulence is hmm, originally derived, is frequently powerful enough to maintain the natural progress of things towards improvement in spite both of the extravagance of government and the greatest errors of administration. Like the unknown principle of animal life, it frequently restores health and vigor to the constitution in spite not only of the disease but of the absurd doctor. The annual produce of land and labor of any nation can be increased in its value by no other means but by increasing either the number of its productive laborers or the productive powers of the laborers who had before been employed. The number of the productive laborers, it is evident, can never be much increased, but in consequence of an increase of capital or of the funds destined to maintain them. The productive powers of the same number of laborers cannot be increased but in consequence either of some addition and improvement to those machines and instruments which facilitate and abridge labor, or of more proper division of the distribution of employment. In either case, an additional capital is almost always required. It is by means of an additional capital only that the undertaking of any work can either provide his workmen with better machinery or make a more proper destination of employment among them. Okay, so I suppose that's a note. So so increase annual produce of land and labor with increase in capital. And then an underline, it goes to machinery, right? That's what you buy with the capital. When the work to be done consists of a number of parts, to keep every man constantly employed in one way requires as much greater capital than where every man is occasionally employed in every different part of the work. When we compare therefore the state of nations of two different periods and find that the annual produce of its land and labor is evidently greater at the later than in the former, that its lands are better cultivated, its manufactures more numerous and more flourishing, and its trade more extensive, we may be assured that the capital must have increased during the interval between those two periods, and that more must have been added to it by the good conduct of some than had been taken from it, either by the private misconduct of others or by the public extravagance of government. Right? So large governments are also not a good thing, as you can see here. Now, of course, if big government goes and gives a lot of subsidies, well, then it's back into the private sector, isn't it? But there is, of course, some other problems with this subsidization. However, if it's an important good, it's good that there is some subsidies to it, I suppose. but it distorts the market forces, right? And the investments that should go into this industry, private investments that should go into that industry. But we shall find this to have been the case of almost all nations in all tolerable, quiet, and peaceful times, even of those who have not enjoyed the most prudent and parsimonious governments. To form a right judgment of it, indeed, we must compare the state of a country at periods somewhat distant from one another. The progress is frequently so gradual that at near period, okay, the progress is graduate. The progress is gradual. And that, of course, goes to show the question that we had not yesterday, but maybe the day before that, right? Where, and that was take from last time, and that was, how does change and innovation come? Is it mostly driven by exogenous shocks or continual improvements? And his answer, at least with respect to what he's talking about here, is that change comes with continual improvements. And I think as he will go on, it's even things that we cannot see. It's very small. But let's see. So the progress is frequently so gradual that at near periods, the improvement is not only not sensible, but from the declination either of a certain branches of industry or of certain districts of the country, things which sometimes happen, though the country is general in a greater prosperity, there frequently arises a suspicion that the riches and industry of the whole are decaying. The annual produce of the land and labor of England, for example, is certainly much greater than that of a little more than a century ago at the restoration of Charles II. Though at present few people, I believe, doubt of this, yet during this period 5 years have seldom passed away in which some book or pamphlet has not been published, written too, with such abilities as to gain some authority with the public and pretending to demonstrate that the wealth of the nation was fast declining, that the country was depopulated, agriculture negligated, manufactures decaying, and trade undone. Nor have these publications, been all party pamphlets, the rich offspring of falsehood and vanity. Many of them have been written by very candid and very intelligent people who wrote nothing but what they believed, and for no other reason but because they believed it. Okay, so this is interesting that he's going beyond these people. He's saying, guys, uh, you see things and you believe it. However, it's not the truth. It's not the truth. So the question is he going against his people and this time, or does he know that he's more clever than them? Or doesn't he know that he's more clever and he's working for the for a different view, a different belief, right? That goes to show that we that he doesn't I don't know, he doesn't it's a little bit weird that he says that those people are very intelligent, however they only write what they believe because they believe it. However, he says that these things are wrong. So is he more intelligent than those people? Does he have a better insight into the data? I don't know. Maybe he's very much ahead of his time and he knows it. Okay, the annual produce of the land and labor of England again was certainly much greater at the Restoration than than we can suppose it has been about 100 years before, and the accession of Elizabeth. And of course, it's not said that Elizabeth the First because they didn't know that there would be an Elizabeth the Second. At this period, too, we have all reason to believe the country was much more advanced in improvement than it had been about a century before, towards the close of the Restoration, between the houses of York and Lancaster. 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 It's a city name. Even then, it was probably in a better condition than it had been at the conquest, and the Norman conquest, and during the confession of the Saxon hip, hiptarchy. Even at this early period, it was certainly more improved country than in the invasion of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, when its inhabitants were nearly in the same state with with the savages in North America. In each of those periods, however, there was not only much private and public profusion, many expensive and unnecessary wars, great uh, perversions, and animal produce from maintaining productive to maintaining unproductive hands, but sometimes in the confusion of civil discord, such absolute waste and destruction of stock as might be supposed not only to, ret- to retard, as it certainly did, the natural accumulation of riches, but to have left the country at the end of the period poorer than at the beginning. Thus, in the happiest and most fortunate periods of them all, that which had which has passed since the Restoration, how many distorted and misfortune have occurred which could have been foreseen? Not only the impoverishment, but the total ruin of the country would have been expected from them. The fire and the plague of London and the two Dutch wars and the restoration of and the disorders of the Revolution, the war in Ireland, the four expensive French wars of 1688, 1701, 1742, and 1756, together with the two rebellions of 1715, 1745. In the course of the four French wars, the nation has contracted more than 145 million pounds of debt over and above all the extraordinary annual expense which they occasion, so that the whole cannot be computed at less than 200 million pounds. So great a share of the annual produce of land and labor in the country has since the revolution been employed upon different occasions in maintaining an extraordinary number of unproductive hands. But had not those wars given the particular direction to so large a capital, the greater part of it would naturally have been employed in maintaining productive hands. Those labor whose labor would have been replaced with a profit, the whole value of their consumption. The value of the annual produce of the land and labor of the country would have been considered increased by it every year, and every year's increase would have been augmented still more that of the following year. More houses would have been built, more land would have been improved, and those which had been improved before would have been better cultivated. More manufactures would have been established, and those which had been established before would have been more extended, and to what height the real wealth of the revenue of the country might have been might be this time have been raised, it is not perhaps very easy even to imagine. And I think that's where we'll end for today. And the end note is the impact of war on the economy. Um, yes. So we are now at page 184, and the things that we talked about today. Well, we started out with one sentence which I immediately wrote down. So great nations are never, and that's related to capitalism. He talked about capitalism and the value of capital. So the great nations are never impoverished by private, though they sometimes are by public prodigality and misconduct. So he says that the private individuals will naturally in great nations, so nations that have a well functioning system and laws that protect them, right? And maybe also a military that will protect them if any wars should come. These people would save capital and they would reinvest it, and therefore there's kind of the economy would continue producing because the money would be invested into productive hands rather than unproductive hands. However, the public could be prodigal in the sense that it would use the money to spend on unproductive labors and not save a lot of this money or spend it into good things. It could also be going to misconduct. It could be that it's corrupt. It could be going to bad trade deals, for instance, um, and it could go to wars, as that is one of the things that we ended with. Um, he said that in order to increase the annual produce of land and labor, you could increase it, of course, by increasing the number of people that worked. However, you would also have to feed those people, so it's not really an increase, right? Or a real increase, it's only a nominal, I suppose, increase. Um, because maybe you had 15 farmers and now they can, and every farmer can work on 1 acre of land, so now you have 15 acres instead of 10 maybe, where you previously had 10 farmers, now you have 15, right? However, it's really the capital that goes into the specific individual. So the marginal the marginal capital that the individual receives, not the marginal capital, I suppose the capital per worker that the individual has. Firstly, because this capital goes into creating machinery, for instance. So it creates so the productivity of the individual can go up. The productivity of the individual can go up, then the produce of land and labor would definitely go up, right? Imagine that a farmer could now do 2 acres of land instead of one, right? Then you had 20 acres with the previous 10, right? You would have 20 acres of land instead of 10, much more productivity. He also said that the progress of nations is maybe slow. It's maybe so slow that people do not notice it in their everyday life, and that's why you have intelligent people that write books and pamphlets that tells you how poor you are. But then he gives example that you might not see it from year to year or from 5 years to 5 years, but maybe you should look at it as century to century. And he goes even all the way back to Julius Caesar, that went into to Great Britain, and says that people that lived in Great Britain at that point in time were savages, as the ones that are in North America today, and those people are not as well off as we are today, right? But of course he compares it to 100 years later, then 100 years later, and 100 years later. So we're always improving. So it's a gradual process, and then he goes on to ask the question, well, what would have happened if we had not had crisis where the public prodigality uh, was high, i.e., spending a lot of money into unproductive hands, and there is a lot of public misconduct, or maybe the population revolted, because he also mentions a couple of periods with demonstrations or the revolution, and also but mainly the war thing, and especially with France, right, the 4 wars that led to 200 million um, pounds in deficit. And I imagine that's quite a large number into if you put it in today's numbers, or it's a quite large amount if you put it into today's numbers. And he ends with that the money that were spent there would imaginably have been spent as capital into the private industry, into into productive hands. So the productive became even more productive, and therefore you would have an increase in the annual produce of land and labor. So he says that it would have been much better than we are today. It's of course a little bit hopeful thinking, and he goes to even to the extent that he says that it's unimaginable how good it would have been if that money would have been spent on the private market. Now today we don't have a lot of wars, and we also see that the money is being put back into the business. However, and I have to say this, it's being spent on the management, right? You see that Elon Musk and other executive managers, CEOs, receive hundreds of million in compensation. So because the stock went up for what is it, for yeah, the Tesla stock went up. Elon Musk has an annual wage of 560 million this year, and Tim Cook usually is in the 100 millions, and this year has 130 million, and that's apparently the second place, right? Ooh, right? Not the first place, second place. Come on, that money needs to be put back into the business, right? Doesn't make sense. That's not what Adam Smith is talking about, right? What are they going to use the money for? They are going to be prodigal. Maybe they're going to save the money, but what's the money being used for if it's not spent, right? It's the product. It's the product of the land. It's the product of the land and the labor, and apparently the productive hands are not being well, they are compensated, but to compensate someone with 500 million, of course I don't know how much the others are compensated with. Maybe they are compensated with 100 million each worker. I don't know, but I doubt it. So maybe compensate those people. I'm not saying tax them. Definitely not. Definitely not. But give the people working there a higher wage, because, as we remember, and I'm trying to find it here in my notebook, it's a note about the consumption. Mm, really hope I find it. And the idea is that it doesn't matter who consumes, right? I think I've gone too much back now, but let's go through this. Yeah, the consumption. Yeah, so the consumption is the same, but the consumers are different. So if people are given the money, maybe they can invest it a little bit better, and therefore you would have more wealth or more capital and more lending by the private sector instead of banking, driven into more projects. And that's the only reason I would be against CEO, that much high CEO compensation, because because they already have a job, right? It's not that they can. Well, of course they could start lending this money out to other projects, and if they do that, then pretty good. Then I take my words back. But if the money is taken and just sitting there, I'm really much against that. And also if it's used on art, because that's really unproductive. It's really unproductive because that's the same thing as or horseback riding or something like that, because that is unproductive. It's entertainment, understandable, but it's unproductive, and it's not going to good use. And buying expensive art is the same as saving the money, right? Because you're buying it because you assume that it has value, and what is money but value, right? You cannot save your money in money anymore because money doesn't have any value really. As we talked with a layman, with Nikki, my good friend, he said that he invests in stocks because he doesn't want his money to lose value with the inflation, and he doesn't get any interest on it in the bank. And therefore, art is the same thing, right? Putting your money in art, it's not the same thing as buying stocks. Excuse me. It's the same thing as having money just laying beside you, because it's unproductive. You're giving it into, if you're buying stocks, good, maybe these companies can do a little bit better. However, we know that what that will also go, as we saw with Tesla, into the compensation. I'm sorry to go into a rant of that, into this thing, but for me this is a big thing. For me, I don't like when money is just sitting around. I'm with Adam Smith on that one. That you can't even fathom how the economy would be if uh, these frugal individuals were less, and that they actually spend the money productively, uh, or at least gave it to some people that can use it productively. So the consumption is different, but the consumption is the same, but the consumers are different. Uh, I really want to believe that that's true, uh, and therefore I can only hope that it will be better. So I think that's it. Now we've summed up um, what we've learned from today. Even though it's little, it's something. And then it's time to find a question to next time. However, I will not be finding a new question. Um, I will just be using the question that I did not answer, and I'll just rewrite it here on the new page, because I think it's a very interesting question actually, and it goes as the following: How, for you that have watched this podcast 2 or 3 days ago, can remember this? How can the value of consumable goods be evaluated, and should they be considered in the total amount of money in circulation? Question mark. So yeah, how can the value of unmeasurable goods, and unmeasurable goods, I mean here services, right? Maybe the military, something like that. And how can they be evaluated, and should they be considered in the total amount of money in circulation? And that's because um, I previously read, as we previously read together, um, and I quote, the sole use of money is to circulate consumable goods. The quality of money, on the contrary, and another quote, the quality of money, on the contrary, must in every country naturally increase as the value of the annual produce increases. Right? So, should we also consider some things that are not consumed? So, maybe the price of having someone come make your bed. That's a service, something like that. Okay, so thank you for today, and thank you for staying with me. 15 episodes. Uh, it's a good. I would argue it's a round number. Um, I feel good when I do these podcasts. Um, I feel kind of productive. I feel that I have something to look forward to, and that even though I might have been unproductive for a period in time, right, in that day, or even the entire day is unproductive, I know that in these 2 hours, will be productive at least. And even though they are at the very end of the day, it keeps me on my feet and tells me that I can't just be tired. I need to deliver, because I have something to deliver. So as per usual, see you next time. But as also per usual, I don't end it like this. There's always a motivation at the end. So the motivation is a quote uh, that I have from my previous employer, called René Rohrbach, that hired me at the university as a student assistant at the management department, or the Department of Management at Aarhus University. And he was really a clever person. Um, Please go watch his stuff on YouTube and read his books, and yeah, try to do research with him. If you're a researcher, you will learn a lot, and try to get inspired by his personality and persona. So one time I had not, he was asking something of me, and I had still not done it. Maybe I was lazy, but I think it's because I had some other things that I had to look to. Uh, I was still a student at that point in time, and he just shrugged it off and said, "If it's not good, it's not the end, right? Or at the end, it's always good. And at the end, it's always good." Yeah, I think the quote was, if it's not good, it's not the end, right? Which tells you that if it's not good, it's not the end. It means that you've not given it enough, right? If it's not good, it's not the end. You haven't finished yet. If what you've produced is not good, you can see that it's not good, then it's not the end. Then it's not the end product. If it's not good, it's not the end, right? It means that you should also still keep working at it if it's not good enough. If it's not good, it's not the end, means that there's something that you can look forward to, something that will be good, right? Something that you will perceive this is good. And he also, it's worth noting that he said that this is an Indian proverb that he learned from some Indian people, so it's not his personal quote. So if it's not good, it's not the end. So keep on working at it, keep on fine tuning it, keep finding those small mistakes that can be improved, and never satisfy until it's good enough. And at that point, you can say, well done, good job, but not before that. Keep on at it, never give up until you have something that's extraordinary. As per usual, I love you all. Take care and see you tomorrow. And my wink here, you get that with the right and the left. I don't know which one is the best, but I think this one is the best, or maybe this one. I don't know. I'll put my finger up as per usual now, as to make sure that you actually get the ending.